It's so beautiful to see the entire film. I had just seen some bits and pieces beforehand, the shorter version, and it's the film itself is so mesmerizing. I mean, in terms of sound, in terms of visuals, in terms of colors. Um, and it connects a little bit to your practice, how expansive your practice is. I also want to say that I am so honored to be here with you. I'm so happy to be able to have this screening. I learned about your work just a few months ago when I was on the selection committee at Pioneer Works for the fellowship, and I remember I was a very strong advocate for you too for that fellowship. And I was so happy to encounter your work. So lo and behold, we're here now at Moma, having an opportunity to screen your film. So your practice is so expansive, incorporating various aspects of technology, design, sound, painting, storytelling, and publishing. How did you develop this facility to activate and work with these various mediums?
Yeah, well, thank you for one for inviting me here and being able to share with you all. Um, I think for me as a kid, I just always was very curious and didn't try and make sense of anything. I just did whatever I wanted to do. And so I think that's been really, it's something I've carried with me. And it's only kind of now that I'm starting to be like, okay, I need to like narrow in and kind of focus a little bit and figure out what is it that I really want to do. But I think it's really important to just embrace anything that you're interested in, and eventually it starts to make sense. Eventually things start to click. But I think for me, being so wide in interest, I learned in sound design. I might use a technique that I did in sound design to now apply it to 3D rendering or to dancing. So I think as you pay attention to different kind of languages and ways of existing, it all influences each other, and then it makes it something even more, dynamic.
It's really interesting because I think that sense of curiosity is sort of is woven through the film. I was thinking about the different genres that you have in there in terms of music that are based on drum and bass. I mean, like just how drum and bass carries, like deep Hammond from just my like trap music, house, deep house, bachata, like various forms that I could like get hints of it, and then it goes into something else.
Yeah.
Same also the way you show the body, like having the sense of like multiplicity and never being fixed. Can you share a little bit about that, how that happens in your work, from like the sense of curiosity, but that sense of like being multiplicity, this expansiveness that carries across?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were even talking a bit about that before all of this, like hyphens, what my mom calls it, of like being in between worlds and being someone that has a background in one culture and then you exist in another culture. And I think that has really influenced this of being Dominican American. So we grow up with music. It's a very vibrant house musically, but then it's also being Dominican is purely a synthesis. You are indigenous Tainos, you are African, West African, and then you're also European. So it's all these influences that are coming together to create the music. And so for me, I've always been very interested in that, of like what are the components. And so you hear a lot of that, like you hear a lot of different kind of drum patterns, and I love studying drum patterns because it really allows the diaspora to coexist together and see their similarities. And then also by studying the drum, the way that I study the drum is by dancing. And so really there were only 2 different dances that were in that video, and I just applied a bunch of different music on top of it to kind of show how even the way that we dance can be applied to so many different genres. But yeah, studying the sound in that way, and also part of what is inspired the aesthetics was, as someone, when I dance, especially when I get really in flow, I feel like my ancestors are running through me. And so sometimes you'll see shadows that are kind of like prismatically representing the body, or you'll actually see like physical bodies around the main dancer. Because for that, it feels like that's what the spiritual experience is. Like, this is not me. I don't know what's going on, who's taking over my body, but it's something else that's going on. So that's what I try to represent.
It's amazing. It also feels like the way the camera is working is that it's just like making these swoops and like, like I'm in just like scanning up and then coming back down. How were you able to achieve that, or even think about that?
I think that's also just like being curious. I love photography. Like that was one of my favorite things in high school, and filmmaking. I've been making films since 10. So I think that attention to perspective is really important, and then kind of using it in a kind of choreographic way. Like, what if the camera can also be a dancer too, and also emphasizing the movement. So understanding how that it immerses you more when you kind of like are traveling around, and the body looks different when you're looking at it from different angles. So it's really thinking about everything of like, how are you experiencing this visually, from the angle, from the colors, the lighting, the sound.
You know, one of the things that I appreciated in reviewing your fellowship application is that I realized your work is so research-based. So I just wanted you to touch base on, a little bit on the Otskokatso Research Atelier, OKRA, which is a year-long self-designed arts residency to bring together years of research and a lifelong artistic practice. How did this process help to bring together the different conceptual threads and various mediums across your practice? And what's that research been like? Because every time we talk on Zoom, like there's an amazing, like there's that book, or there's something else, or there's a record, you know, there's different materials, I think, that you're bringing into your research.
It's very research-based. It's kind of like making an art of the research practice. And Otskokatso is, I started creating that almost about a year and a half ago. And so that came from me realizing I really need to take my art seriously, you know, and like, I think for me, I've always considered myself an artist and I've always created, but I didn't, I don't know, I kind of had a different relationship to it than what I realized I need to have. I need to take it a lot more seriously and kind of invest in it. And really it kind of comes from when people ask me, oh, what do you create? What kind of artist are you? I'm like, I don't know. How do you like describe it? You know, how do you give words to it? And so I realized I need to learn how to be able to describe what I'm doing better. So I need to know what I'm doing better. And so I created this residency where I just spent about a year and a half inside of a studio alone, like every day, and just creating and making a mess and reading a lot of things and listening to a lot of music and kind of discovering what is it that I really like to do? Like what is what are the inklings? What are the things that I'm drawn to? And also prove to myself my capabilities. I think that also then investing in one's confidence of like, if you don't prove to yourself that you are capable of doing something, then you're never gonna feel like you're capable. So I had to really kind of just take a lot of different mediums seriously. So I started to paint larger than I ever had, and that sort of thing. And then also a big part of the residency was this myth that I started to build of in studying myself and doing a lot of sort of like psychoanalysis of like, how do I exist? What is my psyche comprised of? And I realized I have these different parts of me, as many of us do. We're not just this singular person who shows up consistently in front of people. We're a lot of different things. And so I had to recognize who are the different people inside of me, and kind of separate them and use them as, what I started to do is use them as these sort of like motifs, like symbols of an aspect of me. And so then I could make it so when I go in the studio, I can now perform one of those motifs. I could be one of those characters and create from their perspective. And so Toizo is one of those characters. I have 12 different characters, so the kind of archetypes. And Toizo is more of the one, so it's kind of like there's Seda, there's Azuli, who is, it's very spiritual also. So there's like Azuli, who represents intuition, water. This is like the beginning of time. And then she births Soloro, and so this is the sun, this is energy. And they also use emotion in different ways. So Azuli uses emotion and she's ruled by it completely. So if I'm in the studio and I'm in my Azuli phase, I'm just creating whatever's coming out of me based off my emotions at the time. Soloro is more of, he embodies emotion, so that's the sun. Seda is Mother Earth, she creates with emotion, so she might make a flower out of a certain emotion. But then Toizo is the one that finally becomes aware that all of this is happening. And so this, even as I watched it, I realized, oh, this is, because I knew it was Toizo's perspective, but I was trying to figure out how was his perspective, and it really feels like these are a bunch of dreams of this world, of understanding the drum and how it might impact and sound and change the body. And so Toizo is really kind of looking at what has already existed and just representing it and making it kind of aware. And so creating those different characters for me, it allows me to, sometimes you can overthink when you go in the studio and you don't know what to create. And so this, I'm ever in that mode, I'm not in a flow, I can just say, okay, I'm one of these characters, let me see what I do and create.
Wonderful. I love that sequence. I think it was a little bit more like dub heavy.
Yeah.
And where the setting felt like almost like the backdrop to like a Sun Ra kind of, you know, space. So alongside, can you share with us a little bit more about Afrotectopia? And how you are seeing this, again, as a social institution or nexus for art, design, technology, and culture. How does this fit in within speculative notions of Afrofuturity and other world-making approaches?
Yeah, the Afrotectopia was something I created while I was in graduate school. So I was in this program that merges art and tech and engineering and design. And I loved it. It was a dream as someone who's grown up loving tech and also being an artist. But I also just felt very isolated culturally and racially. It's not a place that's racially diverse. And so I just, all the time that whenever I would create something, and I would take it back home and my friends were excited about the things that I was creating, I felt very disappointed that it wasn't something that they felt like they could have access to as well. And for me, inside that program, it didn't feel like it was that difficult. It felt like it was just more a matter of having the resources and the teaching and the mentorship. So I wanted to combine the worlds. I've always been in a predominantly Black space, and I love my culture deeply, and I also want to bridge that gap between the tech world and the creative tech world. And so that was kind of what it was. It was a synthesis of my love for culture and my love for creative technology. And it was about creating a community of people that could see themselves do this sort of work, because I would have never imagined I would be doing this kind of stuff at like 5 years old. And my mom is here in the front row. And we would come to you guys. My mom has always been someone who's invested so much into my practice. But even still, you can only do but so much. And so as a kid, I didn't see people that were doing this kind of stuff that looked, like I do. And so I recognized how impactful that is to the subconscious. If you don't see people that are doing things that might be something you'd be interested in, and they look like you don't think it's a possibility. And so that became very urgent for me to make sure that I can do that for other people, or that they can see themselves and see a whole world that they maybe didn't know existed. And so it's been a lot of different forms. It started off with a festival of bringing communities together and kind of like all thinking about this in tandem. And then also it's been a think tank. We just finished an incubator between MIT Media Lab Space Research, Space Exploration Initiative, and NYU, the program that I came out of. And I brought a few artists together, and we reimagined space travel, but through a very speculative, cultural, and spiritual lens, and then turned all that research into this amazing, very beautiful book that's now for sale on our website. But yeah, it keeps growing and changing as I learn how I want to exist within the world and what I feel like the world could use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so beautiful, because it just like, again, iterates this thread that you bring about multiplicities of perspectives, of understanding, of like positionality, and how to kind of create a sense of agency around that. So, one thing I also wanted to ask is that there's, again, there's an exuberance and almost mesmerizing quality to the film. I mean, I could see this, like, watching this on a loop and just, like, being, like, completely, like, there with it. It's almost as you are an avatar or conduit for the audience itself. I mean, at certain points, I've felt myself embodied in your dance moves. Much of that is framed by how you're using sound and how the drums communicate these sort of ancestral forms of knowledge and perhaps cultural memories. Again, playing across time and space scales. If you can share a little bit more on that.
I think just exploring and learning as I go. I think even with these technologies, so much of it, as you create with it, you just figure out, oh, okay, this is what happens if I do this. And so when you keep going in that direction, I think just having a very open approach whenever you're creating is really important, and to not be too guided and directed. But yeah, I think it's really just such a synthesis of all the things that I've experienced. I mean, my first relationship to dancing was watching my mom dance. She loves to dance. And so I think that kind of seeps into me. And then a lot of different things that I notice with people around me and things that I admire, they all kind of come in. And I think multiplicity is the perfect word, in that we're all multiple. And I think I really try and live in a way that embraces that and is graceful with that. And I try and encourage other people to also do that. Like, open up and not open up in a way where you're kind of just, you recognize your humanity and that you're so many things, and give yourself the space to do that. And I think in being an educator, that's definitely a space that confines you and teaches you that you need to be siloed and exist as a scientist, or you need to be a botanist. But there's I think it's way more powerful when you are a botanist and also a musician and also an engineer, because you are synthesizing so many different ways of understanding the world and understanding that the world is very interconnected. So
I mean, I think that's one of the strands of Western European thinking, which tends to be this sort of like kind of very kind of linear, sense of kind of fixing yourself in time and space.
Exactly.
And then, how to, within those frameworks, still think like time and space can be malleable, because we are such multiplicit, dynamic individuals of who we are, really. Finally, because you talked to your mom, like what fed and inspired that curiosity along the way? And what are you continue to be inspired by and curious now?
Yeah, I mean, like, as I mentioned, my mom, like, I was talking to her earlier, and she was telling me how we came here even at 4 years old. You know, being exposed to the arts, I think, is really important. And I think everyone, just exposing yourself to as many things as possible, really influences you in ways that you might not directly see immediately, but it seeps in and it becomes something. But yeah, I think now what I'm curious about is definitely continuing to dance, though I feel like once I kind of did something, I'm ready to go on to something else. So I don't know, I might be done. Dancing just doesn't feel the same now, but yeah, I think right now, I mean, still I'm very invested in plants. I love plants. I live with so many plants, and probably going more in that direction. But I think even in making this film, I spent a lot more time, concentrated time with sound in a way that I hadn't given myself before. So I think I'm really excited to kind of just like go back into music and make remixes and all sorts of stuff. So I don't know, I'm open.
Eddie, I think we can open it up for questions. Yeah.
Well, one more round of applause. Thank you so much. Yeah, questions from the audience. As you can tell, we are just projecting our voices.
Yep.
So if you need any help with, just let me know what your question is, and I can project it out to the panelists. So, right over here, yeah.
First of all, what an amazing project. It was truly mesmerizing. Even though it was so multidisciplinary, I'm curious, what did you find was the biggest pleasure in doing it, specifically? And then what was the opposite? What was the thing about this that you never want to do again?
Well, I mean, the team knows I sent this file like past midnight today. I was just trying to get I just wanted to be as, best as possible. So I definitely am drained, and I don't want to ever create that situation for myself where I like work to the finish line and work so aggressively. Because it changed. I think for me, I'm very much someone who's very intentional about separating my art from any pressure, financial pressure, anything, because it's such an important thing to me, and it really kind of like dictates how I feel. So I'm learning how to balance that a bit more and make sure I design situations for myself where I'm much better with time and things like that. The pleasurable part, I think, is just this overall exploration. Like, I've always been someone who's loved music and how it's different in different cultures, but also very similar. And I think one of the nice things to see is being able to use, like I mentioned, 2 different dances. I only have 2 different versions of the dance that I was doing, but I could apply techno and dub house and go-go and a little bit of salsa, like all these different genres I could apply to the music and then see it still resonate a bit with the dancing. Or even like, I love merging cultures and also sound. Like, I merge sometimes gospel, a different kind of like jungle-ish techno music. So I think that kind of way of creating through sound, which exposes culture, is fun for me.
Hey,
Hey.
I was a former student of yours. Of course, this is an amazing film. This is very, very consistent with her teachings, and it's a beautiful evolution of kind of the work that I've known her for and what has been put on the screen. My main question is that in the film, there was a lot of geometry, a lot of shapes being used, a lot of fractals being used. And I wanted to know, given the theme of this particular creation of belonging, or perhaps the construction of it, if there was a formula, perhaps either linear or non-linear, like y equals mx plus b, and you'd have your amplifier and your starting point, and these are kind of the components that make belonging, or at least makes belonging well.
Yes, that question is so reflective of you as a student. Amazing to see you. And we were even talking about geometry a bit too, of kind of like the sacred geometry, cultural relationships to geometry. And I think that even when I look back at my work as a much younger, even like a decade ago, it always was very geometric, and I don't know why. And I think that's kind of just something that seeps in through us culturally, because we see it around us a lot. And I've always been very inspired by South American aesthetic, even parts of Mexico, like even Chipotle's. Like sometimes I go in Chipotle and I love the graphics there. But I also grew up loving architecture. And I think I was able to bring that in here too. I always wanted to be an architect. And so now I get to kind of apply that idea into these roles too.
And I think back to the curatorial piece is that the making space for belonging, the project that we have in the creativity lab, is this sense of like, again, how do we think of spaces in the most kind of fluid forms, both hard shapes as well as soft shapes, of how we find ourselves in those spaces for belonging and kinship. And that can be a collective space that we all create, or it can be an architectonic space, or it can be a space, you know, woven through memory and histories. So in that sense, it's like very expansive, but it goes to your sense of like the building and creating, and then kind of like the unfolding of it as well, and becoming, and the becomings into something else.
And that's something I like about Audubon's, appreciate of it too, of that it, similar to that, but also kind of in a different vein of, it's so intricate. There's so many things that are happening. It also is very geometric, but kind of in an organic way. But then also, when I stand in front of it, I feel like it could be so many things. And I like that, the abstraction of like how it's kind of allows you to interpret it what you want it to be and what you kind of grab from it. And so I think that's something I also appreciate within my work of leaving it open enough for people to kind of bring themselves. Like, how do you interpret it? How do you feel about it?
Thank you.
That's also something we were talking about earlier of like being someone has a culture outside of being like American or Western, being whether you're South American or Caribbean. It's a very colorful, vibrantly colorful culture. So that has always been something that I kind of brought into my work. And yeah, I've always loved creating color palettes and wanted to do that here, whether it's with lighting, whether it's with kind of like, patterns on top.
Any question?
I was trying to follow how the dancers morphed, and it went from a single person in a spotlight to circles. But at some point, instead of being a dancer in the spotlight, there was it was a plane of dancers, a wall of dancers. And then, so the architectural, it's like people creating an architecture or being part of an architecture. That was really interesting. But then it also, I was thinking cells or plants or seeds. What is, right? As you progress into more like spatial planes and openings, you know, these like, all of a sudden they tilt and open up another space. Is that growing? Is it, I mean, what's the line between mechanical and organic?
Yeah, I love that. That's what you're saying. Yeah, I think
It's very cool.
even as I watch it now, I kind of think of like one part of it, I feel like it's kind of, it looks like how a church windows might be designed, you know, and I think that's a big part of it, like the sacred, spiritual kind of part.
It's almost like tessellations. Just in that space.
Yeah.
Most organic.
Yeah, and that was the feet, watching the feet dance. You see the bottom of the feet, so moving. But yeah, I think about that. Even I also saw the cellular kind of thing. I don't think I intentionally did that, but I saw it afterwards. And I think about that within our bodies too, of like when we dance, what might be going on at a cellular level. And I also think about a big inspiration of this is how in creating this, because what I did was I just played a playlist of music, a bunch of different genres, mostly diasporic, and a lot of it was Afrobeats. And as I listened to it, as I mentioned earlier, it's like just taking over my body. I'm just doing all sorts of stuff. And then I watch the videos back because I record myself. I'm like, who is that person? Like, where'd that come from? And a theory of mine is that, and how I bring that in relation to cellular level, is that I think when we experience certain things that interact with our senses, that they unleash memories that maybe we didn't have in our lived experience, kind of like epigenetics. Like there's some relationship to me and these African drums in a way that's not part of my lived experience, but it's part of my heritage, culture, it's upbringing and listening to Dominican music, but also I think at a cellular level, there's something that really attracts me to it and it unleashes parts of me. So that's what I also try and represent a bit of, like, this is more than just like a person dancing. There's so many things that are going on.
It becomes like generative.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Is there one in the back?
Hello.
Yep.
Amazing work.
Hey,
Awesome.
yeah.
Also, just see the growth and stuff here, because you're kind of like 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. And it's, it's amazing. Like, that you would speak on on things like cellular levels and like the spirituality and stuff like that. My question was more on the lines of like you mentioned like the camera like the perspective of one of these like spiritual being that you would like think about or like what you call it compartmentalize like different like ways of like entering like the studio and stuff like that. And something that I have like in conversation with a lot of like friends and peers and stuff is like the concept of like transposition and how like some of the things like apply on like different levels as well as like fractals and how like everything is just like repetition like smaller versions of larger scale things. And that's a lot of things I was seeing in like the artwork whether it's like actual movements being like repeated setting of like shapes and identified by certain laws, like even like in that way like I would notice like something like when the person step there's like a scene where like there's like a whole bunch of dancers in a circle and then one person in the center was like slightly off center and like those kind of like aspects where like everything follows a rule except for like one slight thing. And I think another perspective not necessarily the camera but of like those like beings that you create in that space and like how that can look like omnipotence in a sense as well when like everything's supposed to like make sense and stuff. I was wondering if like you intentionally incorporated that level of like things where like thinking of the perspective of the camera but also the perspective of like these models that are learning from us and learning from what we incorporate into it and the fact that like this whole universe is like the big like the whole like fractal and the whole tessellation of everything is just like black space that moves and like that's like a whole universe within that and like if you can like speak on that if you
Yeah, thank you. I think it is very, I could see the fractal is definitely something that inspires me. Even when I look at like plants' leaves and like all the little lines that are moving between them, and it's similar to human veins, you know, just like this designs are very similar at a very micro level and a macro level. So I think that's something I also try and show. Like you can sometimes see a dancer very wide out, like how the opening scene sort of like very wide out, and then you get closer and you see detail, and its form appears differently. But amazing to see you, 10 years, crazy.
Yep.
This was incredible. Thank you. I'm curious, how many total technology did you have to use? I was curious as to how many videos were present here.
Yes. It started off, I started building this in a residency that I did at University of Maryland. That's where I went to undergrad. So I would enter this motion capture studio and it would capture me dancing, improvise, just moving around. And then I would use that file of the movement and I would apply it to a character inside of Cinema 4D, which is my favorite 3D rendering software. And then inside of Cinema 3D, I would design the environment, so the colors and architecture and all of that, and then also place the dancer, and then also sometimes like make a bunch of dancers or whatever. And then after that, and rendering it, which is the worst part actually, to go to your question, that's the worst part. Oh, the last scene that took 5 days to render out of my computer. Yeah, it was crazy. And one time it crashed midway through. So yeah, exporting it out of Cinema 4D and then putting it into a video editing software. Mine is Final Cut, and then doing all the post effects. And then after getting the visuals, now into Ableton and design the sound. I really like to kind of like in different ways represent the movement through different kind of sounds and then clip it all together.
Last couple of, one, two. Yep. In the middle, in the center? Yep.
Hi, it's great to see this. I've also been supporting you for like a very long time from Fractal Fed, Be Gold on the Inside.
Oh my God.
So my question was similar to that, but more specifically regarding like your journey to, like I would say like mastering your niche. You spoke a little bit in the beginning about there was a point where you had said to yourself, I have to take this more seriously. And so my question is like, what led you to that, and how did you go from acknowledgement and like awareness to then executing, and like what was that process of like committing to yourself like?
Yeah, well, thank you. Like a long time of appreciating, so thank you. I think really that like thought came in my head very loudly. I when I was in Barcelona, and it's a very significant place to me, Barcelona. When I was an undergrad, I studied there for a year, and that was the first place that felt like the world took art as seriously as I do, because it felt like I was in a city that just really appreciated the design of everything. Like the design of their tiles are beautiful. So that made me feel seen in a way, I guess, by being there. And so then when I went back maybe like 7 years afterwards, and remembered that feeling, because between then I went to grad school and I started to work at different places and always would do art in my own way, but didn't really feel like I just didn't know how to turn it into something out more. And so going back to Barcelona was really inspiring me. It gave me that feeling again, which is a really important feeling to me, of like remembering how important art is to me. So in that trip, I decided, okay, I'm definitely gonna get a studio. And being someone who's very kind of like money conscious, getting a studio was perfect because it gave me a consequence if I didn't take it seriously, because I had to pay the rent every month. So yeah, that pushed me to be in there every day and squeeze everything I could get out of that. So I documented my whole process. I made as much work as I could, and then in doing that, I learned a lot about how do I want to exist within the world. And it's funny that you say mastering a niche, because I feel like I'm just starting to finally figure out, okay, these are the things that you like, and I can see that I've done this my entire life, so clearly there is something here, and now it's finally coming together in a way where it's making sense, and I feel like I'm just beginning. Now I can like go off and do things in a way where I can immediately feel flow, because I'm not questioning all these different things, and there's not, it's like, I think the world is so abundant, but it can also be overwhelming. And it's like, okay, well, if I could be a painter, if I could be this, and this, then what do I need to do, And so I think having direction really kind of like stops a lot of the noise and allows you to be a lot more clarified. So I feel like I'm at that space that's a bit more clarified and can now, have a body of work that I'm really excited to build, because I kind of know more of what I'm doing.
Yeah. I feel like that's different than like a master, which is what
Yeah.
just having the confidence, like the knowing what you're good at, and willing to invest in what you're good at to become better.
Yeah, I would say even before knowing that you're good at it, knowing that you love it. Like, I know I love sound, so even sharing this, I'm like, I don't know, it's like, it's a weird feeling, because I see art more as an expression. It's not something to make other people appreciate it. I know I appreciate it. So I think it's really important when you love it, and then you'll do whatever you need to do to get good at it.
Thank you. We have one in the back, and then.
Hey.
I guess picking up on some of the, obviously this film is a production of it, like steeped in technological work, and I was curious, like, as it kind of goes through these worlds and spaces that are both like could exist in the life that we live here every day, and then into spaces where they're completely obviously created through technology and through like imagination and all of that. And I was curious, like, how you kind of made the decisions between like moving between those worlds and kind of through those worlds as the film progressed.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see as an opportunity with this work is it kind of feels like a hack. Like, I don't have to be this multi-millionaire artist who has all this funding to create an environment that I can perform in. Instead, I can digitize myself and now create scenes better than Beyonce, So I think, I kind of just like can really use technology to elevate my practice in a way that I couldn't ever before. And then I think the forms change based off of just, it's kind of like clay to me. That's what the technologies feel like. I go in one direction, I see, okay, it does this when I do this, so let me keep going in that direction. So I think that is a part that kind of just like is a natural part that unfolds out of the process of, sometimes it might feel like something that's very realistic, or sometimes it might feel like something that you don't know what's going on. It's just a bunch of, shapes moving around.
Back there?
Hey, Ari.
Hey.
And I came a little late, so let me know if you already covered this, but so much of your work has these beautiful layers of meaning and reference and metaphor. I was just hoping you could tell us more about the title and the meaning and metaphor and message.
Yes. So Cosmeage is a word I created. I love to create words. And Cosmeage is brings together cosmos and lineage. And so this, and thank you for asking because I didn't explain this. Cosmeage, I see it as I was mentioning earlier, of like when I listen to music, it feels like it's ancestors coming through me when I dance, and I'm doing things that I didn't know I could do or why I'm doing it, but it's relation to the sound. And so how I see memory as something that you can experience memories outside of your lived experience through sound and other senses being tapped into. So the idea with this is these dancers, as they listen to the different drums, it takes them across the lineage just as far as the stars. Like every ancestor that's ever existed, you can see how they are embodying that in some way.
And the second word?
Toizo is one of the archetypes that I created. So I did this self-guided residency, and I created these different archetypes that would allow me to kind of divide the parts of myself that I recognize, but I don't. We often, how we're just, all of us are so expansive. There's so many parts of us. And so when we kind of pay attention to the different parts of us and give them the freedom to be who they are in the moment and not need to bring all of them together, it feels very liberating for me. And so by creating these different archetypes, I can let myself be this version of me that's interested in these certain disciplines if I want to, or I can go into my studio and perform these different archetypes, and it allows me to, it kind of like constrains the practice so I don't get overwhelmed with all the things I could possibly do, and I can say, okay, I'm Toizo today. And so Toizo is an archetype that's the first level of awareness of all the things that are going on. So we start off as very intuitive, and then we kind of just like as a baby, we radiate any emotion that we have and then feeling. And then Toizo is finally that moment where you become aware of who you are and what you're doing. And so that's this representation.
Thank you.
Well, Ari Melenciano, thank you so much for this opportunity to screen your film. I want to give thanks to my colleague Eddie Almonte for helping us organize this event. And we invite you to go visit the Creativity Lab, also the Otobong and Kanga installation that we shared about in the atrium at Moma. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.